Alrighty, Brother Steve. So here is our lesson on how to change a bicycle tire. So first of all, you need some of these. Extreme close-up. That's a tire lever. So plastic is good. That way it doesn't tear the tube. And I'll show you what the little hook is for here in a second. Hopefully this focus is working. We'll see. So the first step you need is you need to get the wheel off of the bike. So it's important that the chain is in the very smallest gear on the back. So I'll shift it so that it tries to shift itself out there and it gets onto the smallest gear, the one furthest to the outside. So next is if you have any sort of lever to open up your brake, you can do that. I have a feeling that your bike probably doesn't. So what you'll probably need to do is let the air out of the tire. That way it'll fit through the brake pads and be able to go off. So on your bike, I believe you have bolts in the rear, but now you can unbolt the tire. And usually if you push the wheel down, it just kind of pops out like that. And now you can see that this axle is in between the loop the chain is making. So we have to kind of work that and get the chain out from around our axle and then take the wheel off. Sometimes it's easier said than done, but after you practice it a couple of times, it isn't too bad typically. Some bikes are a little trickier than others, but I think you'll be okay. So set the bike down. If you have a work stand, that comes in handy, but I will assume that you don't have a bicycle specific work stand. So I'll let the air out of the tire. So your valve here will look a little different. It'll look more like a car, but same thing. You can, if you want, use this little hook to depress that valve stem. Since your tires are already flat, you're probably good. So let all the air out. It doesn't matter which side of the tire you start on, but you always want to work only on one side, not trying to do both at the same time. So with the valve stem here, I'll start 90 degrees away. Again, it doesn't matter which direction 90 degrees, but I don't want to start right at the valve stem or directly across from it. I'll take my tire lever. It looks sort of like a spoon. You want to get the spoon edge underneath the edge of this tire. So probably should have started this before. One thing you may need to do, probably not, but sometimes you need to sort of pinch the tire, trying to push both edges of the tire towards the center of the rim. There's a little depression in the center. That'll make it easier to get off. Most tires don't do that or need it, but this particular tire and rim combination does. So I often forget because it's not very common. So now I'm going to work on this side of the rim. I peel it back a little with my fingers, and you may not be able to see, but this side of the tire is already coming up. So I take this tire lever like it's a spoon and put it under the edge, and I just spoon that out. Now our hook comes into play. I can hook that around the rim, or excuse me, around the spoke, and it'll stay put. So since I'm going to be working with this, I don't need to, but oftentimes it's just simple enough where I hold the lever so that it's parallel with the spokes, and I can either push or pull this lever. I'll pull it towards me, and as I pull, this side of the tire will come off of the rim. It's important that you don't try and pull with a tire lever perpendicular to the wheel, because it won't really come off of the rim. What you'll do is you'll pull a little section off and it'll go right back on as soon as it passes the lever. So pull, pull, pull. This one's going to come off really easily. Assuming that you have a little more trouble, you can put one in, clamp it on the spoke, and then with the next one, Go down about 2 inches or so, and it's a little different for every tire, but do the same thing. And by the time you get 2 off, you really should be able to pull it. If for some reason you still can't, a third one's really handy, but if you only have 2, you can usually take the first one back out and go down again a couple of inches, get it underneath there, and kind of spoon that tire off. So now at this point, the tire's almost falling off of the rim, so it's pretty simple. Push or pull, doesn't really matter, all the way around. So there you go. One important thing is when you do pry this off, make sure you don't get both edges of the tire. You don't want that tool to go underneath the whole tire, just one side. So I have it off, leaving the valve stem in place. Grab the tube from underneath the tire and pull it out all around the tire except for where the valve stem is. Leave that in for just a second. So pull this out. Now with the valve stem still in, you can grab the tire, peel it back, and expose the tube, and out comes the tube. So we'll worry about patching the tube later, but for now we're going to assume you have a new tube. You want to put enough air into it that it just holds its shape, kind of like this one. It's really flimsy and floppy, it hasn't started to expand, but it's also not completely flat. That makes it a little easier to work with. So a key, and this is often forgotten, before you put this tube, your new tube in, you want to figure out why your old tube went flat. So, 2 things. Take your fingers and just run your fingertips on the inside of the tire, feeling for any glass or thorns that have gone through. So do that all the way around. You know, you never want to find one because it means you just pricked your finger, but it's better than putting it in a tube and having it go flat 17 seconds later. So you go through, I don't feel anything, which I would expect because I didn't have it flat. And you'll also see that there's a rubber strip on the inside of your rim that's covering the ends of the spokes. If that rubber strip is ripped or pushed off to the side and the ends of your spokes are exposed, it will actually put a puncture on the inside of your tube. So pretty good chance you'll need to replace that on your bike because after a few years that rubber will break. It tends to break first right where the valve stem of the tube came out. So check there for sure. They usually break on one side first, and then when the other side goes, it'll kind of curl up inside the rim. So those are a couple bucks. You can use duct tape if you want to, but you might as well get the right thing. So let a little air out of this. That's about the right amount, just enough to hold its shape. So with my thumb or with my hand, again working on the same side of the rim, notice I never actually took the tire all the way off unless I'm going to change the tire. So peel it back, exposing the hole for the valve stem. Push the valve stem down through it, and then peel it up and over so that the tube is now underneath. So the next step is push the tube so that it's inside of the tire. Don't worry about the rim yet. Inside of the tire all the way around. And now you want to actually push the tube and the tire, them both, so that the tube is centered over the rim. You're not worried yet about the actual edge of the tire. We just want the tube so that the tube is centered on the rim. So when we put the tire on, we're only doing one job at a time. So kind of go around with both hands. It's usually pretty easy, but I'm just kind of pushing down so that tube ends up in the center of the rim. And that sometimes, as this side goes in, this side will start to come out. So it's good to do it with both hands at the same time working away. And when you meet together on the other side, usually you're in good shape. So, just like we started at 90 degrees from the valve stem, taking the tire off, we want to end at 90 degrees. So what I usually do is I say I'm going to end here, you know, at 3 o'clock from the, so I'll kind of start wherever, maybe even start right at the valve stem. At first it's really easy, you have no issues at the beginning. And notice what I'm doing is I'm just pulling it with my fingers, pulling the edge of the tire, the bead of the tire, over the side of the rim. Another way you can do it is you can push it with your thumb. And your thumb has a little more power, so as it starts to get harder, that's a good way to do it. Notice that here's my valve stem, and I'm kind of in my mind thinking that I'm working to here, 90 degrees away. So I'm pushing, I'm holding my thumb here so that the part that I pushed on over here doesn't start running away from me. You can run yourself in circles around it. So push, 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 I'm still holding. So now as I get towards the end, it starts to get a little bit harder. You may be able to push really hard with your thumbs and get it over the edge, but let's pretend that you can't and you get stuck and you have that much left. So now you take your tire tool, you put the spoon, you know, the concave part of the spoon, so that it's touching the rim. You kind of get it underneath the tire. And it's always tricky right here, but you have to kind of push it underneath. Now when you flip this lever up, that whole tire goes on. Sometimes it's that simple and sometimes it's not, but it usually is pretty straightforward once you're there. So at this point, you put air in it, you're good to go. We'll pretend like I just pumped it up. It'll show you the maximum inflation pressure on the side of the tire. Shoot for 10 or 20% below that pressure. So if it says 80 psi, then figure maybe 65, 70, something like that. So pick my bike back up, and this is the part that confuses a lot of people. So I have my rim, it's just behind the bike. You have to think of your chain making a loop. You know, this loop has a couple little jogs in it, but this axle needs to end up inside of this chain loop. And that can be a little bit confusing. But you notice as I roll this tire forward, hopefully you can see it in the video. As I roll it forward, and I kind of get the chain down below that cassette, now my axle is inside of that loop. And I set the top chain on the outermost gear, which is where we had it earlier as we were taking it apart. When I set it down, you'll notice that it just kind of moves up into place all by itself, and all I have to look out for now is getting my wheel back through the brakes. And you usually kind of have a little pop moment where everything sort of pops into place. The axle has to go back into that same little spot, of course. So there's the pop. Everything's back where it needs to be. I need to tighten up my brake if you have it, tighten up the axle, and we're set.